Cloning lets you create multiple copies of your sprite while your project is running. When each clone is produced, it has the same costumes, sounds, scripts, and variables as the original, but it's otherwise independent. Clones can work for you, saving you coding time and helping you create dynamic and interactive projects. Let's explore how clones work and experiment with how you can use them in your projects. There are 3 blocks that are specific to clones, which can be found in the control category: create a clone, delete this clone, and when I start as a clone, where you can define code that only applies to the clones and not the original sprite. As an example, let's imagine we want to create a piano. We could create each piano key as a separate sprite and code each one, but let's try creating the keys with clones instead to speed up the process. I've set up a simple script so that when the sprite is clicked, the costume will change, a note will play using the music extension blocks, and then the costume will change back. Let's add to our script. Repeat 7 times, create a clone of myself, and move 50 steps, because my sprite is 50 pixels wide. When I run the script, I see 7 clones have been created, in addition to my original sprite. If I click on the sprite in the sprite area, it will briefly flash the original sprite, so I can identify it apart from the clones. When a clone is created, the scripts for the original sprite also apply to the clone. So right now, as I click on the original or each clone, they all play the same note, note 60. Of course, piano keys play different notes, so let's create a variable called note so we can assign each key a different note. What kind of variable should we create though? A global variable applies to all sprites in the project and all their clones. A local variable is individual to a single sprite or a single clone. Choose for this sprite only. We are creating a local variable. First, set the local variable to the initial note 60. Then, in the repeat sequence, after a clone is created, change the variable note by 1. Don't forget to add the variable as the input in the play no block. Let's run the code and click on each piano key to see the result. I'm going to add some temporary code to have each key say its note number while the note plays to help us understand how the code is working. The value stored in each clone's local note variable is the value that was present at the moment the clone was created. So, for the first clone, the local note variable was storing 60, so clone 1's variable value is 60. Then the local variable value was changed by 1, so when the script repeated and clone 2 was created, the local variable value was 61, so clone 2's variable value was 61, and so on, and so on. What if we had instead chosen for all sprites and created a global variable? To see the difference between a local and a global variable, let's temporarily create another test note variable and set it to apply to all sprites, so it's global. If we use this variable instead, what do you notice? The value stored in the global variable is the value applied to all sprites in the project and all of their clones. The value can be changed, but the change applies globally. After all the clones are made, the global variable contains 67, which means all the clones and the original sprite play note 67. After this test, it is clear that in the case of the piano key notes, using a local variable gives us the result we want. Now, what if we wanted the ability to change the instrument? You can change the instrument directly in the code itself using the set instrument block. But if you wanted to give the user more control over the instrument from the stage, notice that each instrument is assigned a number. We could set up another variable to hold the instrument number and give the user a slider so they can adjust the instrument number while playing the project. What kind of variable should we create though? A local variable, set at the moment each clone is created, or a global variable that applies to all sprites and all clones in a project? We want all the keys to be the same instrument, so in that case, we need a global variable, one set for all sprites. Since there are 21 instruments to choose from, I'm going to show my instrument variable on the stage and right-click to change it to a slider. Then I can right-click it again to set the range from 1 to 21. We'll set the instrument initially when the green flag is clicked, and then use the instrument variable as an input in the set instrument block. Now let's run the code and adjust the slider to see if it's working as expected. For contrast, here I'm demonstrating the difference if we had created a local variable instead to store the instrument value. Notice if the variable was local, the instrument would change for the original sprite as the user adjusted the slider, but not the clones. Because the local variable value for the clones is set at the time of their creation and remains fixed. The slider on the stage for the local variable only applies to the original sprite. There is no stage monitor for each individual clone's variable. In the piano example, we had the original sprite move around the stage and create clones based on the settings of the original. A different option would be to create clones and then have them adjust their settings. In this balloon popping project, I have created a script that creates a clone every second when the green flag is clicked. When a clone is created, I have another script just for clones that starts with the when I start as a clone hat block. This script tells each clone to go to a random position, set its color and size at random, wait, and then delete itself. And finally, I have a third script that says when the sprite is clicked to delete the clone. Notice that the original sprite doesn't move, change color, or change size. And when I click on the original sprite, nothing happens. But when I click on a clone, it is deleted. Remember that clones are just like individual sprites, so the when this sprite is clicked script applies to them too. Since they are clones, the delete this clone block applies to them, but not the original sprite. Now what happens if I add a score variable and give the player a point when the sprite is clicked? You'll need to regenerate your clones to see the changes in action. I could cheat the score by clicking on the original sprite over and over again. When the sprite is clicked, change score by 1 applies to both the clones and the original sprite. In this case, I'll want to adjust my program to hide my original sprite so my player can't cheat, but I need to be sure to show my clones. For a final example, let's look at this fractal generator. In this project, I'm broadcasting messages that instruct a sprite to draw a branch of its fractal tree and then split the branch and repeat drawing and splitting branches. Notice one of the broadcast messages triggers a script that says to create a clone. Because clones are just like sprites, they also receive these broadcast messages. That means each clone is creating a clone when it receives this message. There is a limit to the number of clones a project can create. At the time of this recording, each program can create a maximum of 300 clones. The limit is important because issues could arise with too many clones. For instance, it could cause the program to lag. How will you use clones in your project?
Tacos, out in the street, tacos, all you can eat.